Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. New week means new theme, and this week we're looking at beautiful music. Music that is very consonant and harmonious, and that I'm going to walk away from feeling a warmth and beauteous element from the music. We're going to start off this week with some Sigur. The track is Andvari. Let's see what they're bringing to the table today. Yeah, so we're in 4/4, but our lead guitar is working in grouping of 3. Really nice production with the distance of all the instruments as well. The strings came in, the violin, at the same time that he shifted the vocals up. Yes, I love the dynamic volume on the violins. The bass idea is interesting in that it tends to emphasize 2 notes and then dips away for a while. I like how the strings have taken the vocal melody and have adapted it into a harmonized idea. Pulling away layer by layer. We have a piano idea over here. toy piano, maybe? I don't know how much of this or how much of the instrumentation in this is real. How much is virtual? Yes. The volume swells. Yeah. Really nice panning effect to give us dynamic placement of the instruments as well as our dynamic vocal ideas. Or, sorry, dynamic volume ideas. Really interesting to have this one instrument dancing around the static notes. Yeah. Uh, Interesting. Yeah, that was phenomenal. I loved most of that. There is one decision I'm sure y'all already saw it coming right there at the end. I wish something else had happened, but I feel when we get into this and we really dive into what the song's doing, I think I'm really going to feel the ending within the context of the track. By itself, it does feel like it goes on just a hair bit too long. I would have liked something else to have happened there, but I think in the context of everything, it works well, and we'll get into why eventually. I do want to look at this song in two sections, the first half and the second half. But I also want to look at production. I think I want to do production first here. So I really love the spatial aspect of this. Each instrument is not only just in a different aspect of the sound sphere, but it's also different distances from the listener. It makes some instruments more difficult to hear, sort of on a volume basis. They're further away, so they are heard less prominently. It kind of comes across as a volume thing, but I also hear a bit of distance to it, like it's further away. It's literally taking the sound longer to travel to my ears. And I just appreciate the wide use of the sound sphere. Placement of instruments is important to craft a specific atmosphere, to craft a specific vibe for a track and personality for it. But also, distance from the listener, I think, is also important because it makes it feel more lived, if that makes sense. A lot of music, especially when we look at, typical four-piece rock and metal bands, everything's very present. Everything's very here. Pop music can kind of get this way too until you start moving out onto the fringes of pop outfits. But a lot of it is just very here, right? There's a lot of space that just isn't being used. And to me, I typically listen to this and think that I'm listening to music. Whereas when I get more of the spatial element, it feels like I'm within the song. Maybe I'm sitting in the middle of the band while they're performing and I can hear them around me. I can hear distances between them. And it just feels more, I suppose, live works. Um, I say lived earlier. So I think it's interesting that live makes a lot more sense, um, being a similar word. But yeah, I really appreciate that. I understand it is an effect that isn't always useful depending what you're going for. Like if you want some, aggressive extreme metal or some, blackened metal or something, you're going to want that tight compression of making the song sound very close to the listener. You're not going to want that space. But if you're going for something like this, that's a bit more orchestral, maybe a little bit more, I guess it really has to do with instrumentation as well as intended vibe, right? You want that wall of sound. You're not going to want space between your listener and the music. But with here, because of the wide instrumentation, the large amount of instruments, the extra space really helps place all of the instruments in the sound sphere. Um, I don't know if it was a production thing or not because I don't know how much of this was performed with real instruments and how much is virtual. Um, but there's also the element of panning and volume. And the volume dynamics kind of can be placed in a performance aspect, but I don't know, again, how performative this is. So I'm just going to lump it in here. I really enjoy the volume dynamics and the panning dynamics. The panning doesn't really get utilized much until the second half, but we hear a lot of really nice soft pans. It's not like prog, where you would hear it, whip across or do like this wave, just kind of crash from one side to the other. Um, it's more of a tasteful impermanence, coming off of the idea of spatial usage where each instrument has its place. There at the end, a couple of the violins felt like they were just kind of shifting around. I couldn't really place where they were. Sometimes they felt a little to the left, sometimes a little to the right, sometimes behind me, and I could never really say, oh, right now they're here and they're shifting to the other side. It just kind of felt like they were always everywhere. And I'm not too sure how they went about doing that, but I'm going to assume panning was one element of it. And I really like that tasteful use on that specific instrument. It wasn't utilized on all the strings, just a very specific violin was given that treatment. And I really love the added flavor it gave it. Much like with the dynamic quality in the performance, we get the strings there at the end, and they would feel like they're fading out and then pull back in with this huge burst of volume. And it's just a very emotive style of playing that we don't get to hear too much on the channel. A lot of the stuff we listen to in hip hop, pop, rock, metal, it's all rather static. There might be dynamic qualities where we have a loud section and then a soft section, but we don't really have crescendos and decrescendos, which is fancy music terms for getting louder and getting softer. It's this really strong emotive playing that is huge in stuff like classical, just not so much in more popular modern genres of music. And I just really love having the opportunity to speak about this, because part of classical music, which I'm going to put this in, I don't know if I would 100% say this is a classical track, but there's a lot of classical influence in it. At best, I would say it's classical with a mix of, I don't know, modern pop, as far as, especially the first half of the track. But the idea is that there's a lot of the classical ideas here, not in the composition, but in the performance. Something about classical that I think a lot of people tend to miss is that when it comes to classical performance, hitting the notes is half of the game. The other half is hitting them correctly. And it's something I think a lot of people just might miss about the genre, especially if they come to it from a mainstream style that doesn't really play around with that too much. Um, the dynamic quality, the voicing, um, the way you get into the note, the attack, the release, all of it has to be hand done. or mouth done if it's an air instrument. I don't know. The phrase is kind of taking on a different life there, but um, yeah, like this when we have those dips and then the rises, and we sometimes slide into a note. Um, the way that the note is performed is just as important, if not more so, than actually hitting the right note, which is very different from a lot of other music, especially when you get into electronic music. Even if it's played live, they're typically working with the MIDI keyboard where velocity doesn't always matter because your sound, your song is pretty much going to be at one solid volume level, right? Any sort of alterations to the attack or the release or anything like that is going to be automated through the modulation, your effects pedals or your effects, VSTs or whatever. The performative aspect is literally just push the right note. Same thing with a lot of metal because of the high distortion, the high volume, all of your effects on your guitar. It's not really about how you play the note, it's more about just hitting it. I think one of the big rock genres that actually went into how you play the note might be more stuff that borrowed from blues, especially when we look at some hard rock and even some psychedelic stuff where you get those guitar solos and people typically say, oh, it's so emotive, or they're really making the guitar talk, right? That's when we look at performance where the note is only half of the equation. It's really about how you're playing the note. But a lot of modern rock and metal have gotten away from that. Pop and electronica don't really utilize it too much. Um, so to me, it's always something that I've equated with classical, and that's not to say again there's no other genre that does it. I just pointed out a more of a modern one that does. But that's just where my brain goes to when I hear stuff like this, especially given the instrumentation. It is a bunch of strings that utilize that. So yeah, I really love the volume dynamics that are on play here, being showcased here, because again, it's just like I said, not something we get to cover too often on the channel, and I love pointing it out. And I think that's it for the production, just really great. And then just the layering, right? The producer definitely did a fantastic job ensuring that in the first half of this track, no matter how many layers we had, that everything was heard clearly. Um, and it was just a very clean mix, which pretty much necessary for a beautiful song. That's not to say that you can't have a gritty, beautiful track, but I think it's a little bit more difficult to do so. You're working with, in most cultures, opposing ideas. So you really have to go out of your way to work a bit harder. Whereas when you're working with a clean mix, it's really easy to make something that is culturally or mainstream accepted as beauty. Um, so yeah, just they did a phenomenal job putting all that together with all the layers. Now, speaking of all the layers, let's get into this first section because I loved it. A lot of it is very subdued. A lot of the layers in here are designed specifically to create a sound floor, a foundational aspect to support our lead element, which is, through most of it, the vocals. And through that, we end up having percussive elements. We have a bass laying down some lower end bass clef stuff. We have some violins. I think they come in at the latter half of this first half. So, between a quarter and halfway through the track is where we start to hear the violins. There's also a piano in here that I said might be a toy piano, which kind of led me into more of a virtual instrument kind of thing. Not to say they wouldn't have went and bought a toy piano or a piano that's... Is there a professional toy piano? Because it is a pretty typical sound once you start getting into instrument libraries. The toy piano just pops up in pretty much every piano set of sounds. And I would assume that some people would want to play a real one, get that tone without, the MIDI. Or not the MIDI, but, oh yeah, the MIDI. without using a keyboard, right? To actually play an instrument that makes that sound naturally. Never thought about that. I wonder if there is a professional toy piano. Um, but anyways, I think the toy piano bit just comes because it has a sharp attack to it, which might also just lend it to being in the glockenspiel family. I couldn't quite tell if it was. I don't know what was making this harsh attack because it was being covered up. Like it was way out to the right. It was being covered up by the strings at the time as well. Um, so I had a hard time really picking out the specific timbre, but something in that range, right? That toy piano or maybe a glockenspiel kind of thing going on. Um, what else do we have? Oh, we had the drums. I think I already said them. The vocals. We had two different vocal types. We had something that was closer to a chest, maybe a mixed chest and head, and then the full falsetto there. And then the outro was a group of strings. Um, it started out with just a violin, I think, from our intro section, and we shifted to some other stuff. And we'll get to that when we talk about the outro. So we have this massive amount of layers, and there's probably some instruments I even missed, right? There's a lot of stuff going on here. And like I said, even that piano idea, I barely picked up on the periphery. So maybe there's some other stuff I might have just completely overlooked because other instruments were just overshadowing it. So we have all these layers of instruments, and most of them, like I said, are providing a foundation for the vocal because the vocals are carrying our main melody. Now, interestingly, this entire first half of the track, and maybe even resonantly in our second half of the track, is based on one idea. You can hear it all throughout the first half of the track, and like I said, it kind of resonates into the second half. I don't know if it is an exact one for one where they're utilizing this foundation without playing it, but it feels very similar to the first half of the track, chordally and emotionally, environmentally, atmospherically. That's the word I want. Um, and what's happening here? It's really interesting because it really threw me off at the beginning of the track. We had just the drums, the bass, and the guitar, I think. The guitar was doing this thing in three groups of three, but they were quarter notes. They were on the beat, which made it really difficult to figure out the time signature. And it wasn't until the very end. Oh, the drums hadn't come in yet. That's right. The drums hadn't come in yet. It wasn't until the end of this intro and the drums came in and the vocals came in and we really got into the first main part of the track. I don't know if I could call it a verse, but we got out of our intro into our A section. And the drums came in and laid down that 4/4. And it was right before that. And I was like, wait a second. This is in 4/4. But we have groups of three on our guitar. So we're working within a polymeter, which made it really difficult to count at the beginning because our guitar. See, here's the thing is that 3 against 4 doesn't line up really well, except in odd groups, because they meet at 12 beats. 4, 8, 12, 3, 6, 9, 12. Well, the problem is that is a 4-bar phrase in 3, but it's a 3-bar phrase in 4, which is an odd place to stop. It feels like you're missing something. A lot of our brains, especially for music, especially if you listen to a lot of mainstream or palatable music, is wired for 4. We have the 16-bar blues, which is 4 bars of 4. We have 4 on the floor, which is 4 beats per bar. The idea of groupings of 4 or 4/4 time, it's just a lot of ideas in mainstream music, and what a lot of people end up listening to is built around 4. So having 3 bars feels like we're missing something. The next group would be 6 bars. Well, that's not too great either. So there's a problem here that I don't know how it gets addressed. Because once the drums come in, I realize we're in 4 bars of 4/4, which doesn't work for 3. That would leave us at 5 bars of 3 and then an extra beat. So 5 1/3 bars in 3. So I don't know what's going on there. I think I heard a couple of times instead of a grouping of 3, we have a grouping of 2. Um, but I don't know where that fits into the pattern for the guitar. So that's something I would go back and listen to and really focus on to figure out what's going on there. But that is what threw me off a lot when I was trying to figure out the time signature before the drums came in, because we would have a bunch of pockets of 3, and I was like, oh, we're in 3/4. We got the 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, and it works because we have these pockets of 3 that are contained within a bar, beautifully constructed. But then there were these moments when we didn't get 3s, we got 2s. And like I said, I don't know the exact pattern, right? We're definitely going to have like 3 3 3 3 2 2. Yeah, that makes 16. So maybe it's 3 3 2 3 3 2, which would be 8 and 8, which would work. But I don't think so, because I remember counting three groups of 3 at least. So yeah, I'm real confused about the time signature and how it relates to the guitar. Like I said, that's definitely something I would go back and listen to. But I caught on to the fact that it was 16 beats just before the drums came in, and the drums really solidified it. Said, hey, checking your math for you. Definitely feels like four bars of 4 here. So yeah, just a really interesting part of the beginning. And I wish I had paid a bit more attention to the layering there. It really wasn't until I got the time signature down, I was like, oh, let me check all this other stuff out now that the foundation is starting to make sense to me. At this point, though, we have a couple other instruments coming in. Our guitar is continuing to do this underlying groups of 3 idea, with variations to it occasionally to fit into this 4/4, but primarily groups of 3. Our bass is doing something very interesting, and again, I couldn't pick up the pattern to it. It might not have even had a pattern. A lot of held notes, whole notes, taking up an entire bar, an entire 4 beats. But occasionally we would have these emphasized hits on 1 and 3, but then not on the next one to extend out for the whole note. It would feel like that whole note tied to a half note from the previous bar to give us a 6-beat held note. And then sometimes we wouldn't even hit on the next downbeat for the next one. So I'm not really sure what was going on. It's very sparse bass line. And again, this is something I would listen to when I can really focus in on one instrument, say, what's going on here? But when I do these reactions, I got to take in as much as possible. So if I'm listening to something and I don't get it, I pick up on the basics and I move on, because you guys expect me to talk about a lot. We gotta fill some time on these videos, and I can't sit here and just talk about what the bass did and then have nothing else to talk about. So the bass was doing this very sparse idea. All right, sometimes you get like a boom, 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 just like these. To me, they feel odd. They're always on at least the 1 or the 3, but I never really picked up when they decided to do these or what the pattern was. The 2 half notes, or the whole note, or the half with the half and the whole tied together. I never really figured that pattern out, but it was always either these 2-beat hits, 4-beat hits, or 6-beat hits, and just kind of holding out a lot of these notes. And it really just fills the bass idea underneath the entire track and gives a strong foundation for everything else. Now the drums. The drums were intriguing, not because of what they were doing, which is pretty simple. Basically just laying down the 4/4, making sure everything else fit within it. I don't think the drums really did anything too interesting. However, the production on the drums, probably should have put this in the last section. The production on drums are interesting because of how they were placed. The snare and the bass kick are typically center. As well, usually the highest toms, depending on the producer. And the rest of the toms will pan one way or the other, depending on how the producer wants to orient the drum kit. And that's why you'll hear like dooga 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 dooga, and you kind of hear it go across your sound sphere. But not here. There is a symbol. I don't know what symbol, A cymbal in the center. Snare is center left, bass kick is left. The drums are over in this corner. And the cymbal kind of resonates into the right side. You can kind of hear the shimmer, the reverberant shimmer over here occasionally, but it is not centered. It's off to the left. And if you have a visualizer while you're watching this, you can see that the song is very left heavy. In fact, when I was altering the volume for this to ensure that it's the same volume as all my other videos so that nobody comes into this and gets their ears blasted while they're trying to check out the song, I had to gauge it against the left side because the right side is so much quieter, but the left side has these spikes on the snare hits. It was really difficult for me to judge if I should actually raise it a little bit higher to match the average sound from the whole band or match the sound to the peaks, which is going to be the snare hits. And I found a middle point for it. I hope the song wasn't too loud I hope the snare hits weren't too loud for people, especially headphones wearers. But yeah, the left side is just weighted so heavily because the snare and the bass are over there, and they have a lot of prominence in the mix. So, very interesting placement for the drums. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it was distracting, but it was interesting, especially since I'm so used to drums being center. It's just a very different place to put them. Like I said, it's not hard panned. The bass is kind of hard pan. It's probably like 80% pan left. That snare is like center left though, kind of in the middle, about 45 degrees out. Just a very interesting place to put the drum kit overall. But it gives the track a very strong personality. Like I said, a lot of bands go centered drum and it just sounds good. It's great for balance. You put your drum and your bass center, you put your two guitars to the side, you put your vocal center, and everything's just nice and balanced. But here, with the wider instrumentation palette, it makes sense to kind of spread things out. Even if it's not 100% balanced volume wise, it's balanced sonically. The drums make sense there. And I really appreciate that. Just kind of taking a moment to say, hey, we're going to do our own thing. What benefits the song? And I love that. So then we have the vocals, and I don't know much to say here. It's very beautiful vocal lines, very palatable. I don't want to say that they're overly mainstream in their phrasing, but there's nothing that I would say was out of place or that I think anybody would find distasteful in the vocal melody. Now, what was interesting, what I really loved, I pointed it out when it happened, is as soon as the vocalist shifted up, about half an octave, I think, and went into the falsetto range, the violin came in that same range. It was a really nice way to bring the violins in while giving them a space that they can work within harmonically. So that when they come in, they're not alone in this upper range. Right? They actually have an element that they can be tied to that was already here prior, and helps them feel like their entrance is a bit more natural rather than a new element being added. It fits in with what's going on around it. Just a really tasteful way to include a new instrument and a new line altogether. The violin and the vocals kind of dance around each other for a little bit. Ornamental stuff all around. There's like that toy piano thing, and there's something treble based in sort of just the middle range. I can't remember what it was, but again, just ornamental ideas, right? Enriching the atmosphere. And about this time is when a lot of the layers begin to get removed. The vocals are first, and the vocal melody actually gets given to the violins. Now there's more than one. A violin section, or a string section, I should say, comes in because there is a couple of there is a section that is a bit too low, I think, for the violin. So I think that's the cello that comes in. And there's at least two violins here. Maybe there's some more stuff. I don't know. Distinctly, I hear two violins and a cello at least. And they start to come in. The vocal melody is given to our lead violins. They harmonize on it. Really beautiful stuff. A lot of our other ideas start to get pulled out one by one. We start to lose all of them until all that's left is the violins, and they do what they did at the end, which is primarily that one violin holding a note for 2.5 minutes. Uh, the other violins playing this simple rotation, this simple like 2-bar idea on top of it, and then having this fade down and fade up and fade down and fade up. And they do that until the song ends. I think the cello eventually gets pulled as well, so it ends up with just the two violins, but I still don't know what to make of it. It I think it does a good job of expanding on the ideas of the song. We have an increase of layer, and we begin to strip the layers back, and we continue to explore a single sound. The first half of this track is one foundation with many layers put on top of it, and our outro is one idea with several layers starting and slowly being removed until we have just the basic ideas. But casually, I'm just a bit, like I said, bored. About halfway through it, I was like, I get it. I see what we're doing. We're taking these ideas piece by piece. And when we got down to just the two violins and maybe the cello, I was like, okay, we can just end it here. And then they took another minute to remove the cello and play this loop a few times before their fade out actually faded out the track. And I wanted something else. Like I said, I could have been fine with the song ending a minute earlier. Don't remove the cello, don't do the repetitions. Just allow these three instruments to fade out instead of dragging it along. But maybe there's something in the lyrics that might change my mind on that, at least thematically or artistically. But musically, like I said, I was kind of already checked out. And like I don't want to say that I would have enjoyed something added here. It would not have worked at all. It would have gone against what this entire ending was doing. But I don't know. I think that's just it though. Is it was extended and it shouldn't have been. If we could have shaved off a minute there, I think we would have been fine. So I guess here we're gonna dive into the lyrics and see what's going on. I don't think there's gonna be too many lyrics. Oh, um, there really isn't any lyrics. So this is a made-up language created by Sigur to take the place of actual words. Supposedly, this made-up language called Hopelandic is written before actual lyrics replace it, though some songs use it exclusively. So yeah, that's where this sits. Is that there are words on the album, but they are not. They don't mean anything. At least not how they're presented to me. It did say that occasionally they use this language before they write actual lyrics. So maybe there are actual lyrics to this that maybe they just have in liner notes or something, or maybe their own notes, I think would be more appropriate. Um, but yes, this final copy of the song, the final version of it that they have mastered and shipped, is basically gibberish. So, no comments on the lyrics then. They could mean just about anything. So, I guess in conclusion, I will say this is a gorgeous song, expertly layered, beautifully written. Love the harmonies, love the dynamic qualities. I love the small little nuances, whether it's the idea of all the ornamentation that they have in the first half, or the idea of passing on the vocal melody to the violins before they end up in their outro, where they move to their 2-bar loop. There's just a lot of really great elements here, a lot of really great tools being utilized by the composer or composers to pull this together. So yeah, gorgeous work. Loved it. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you enjoyed about this track, if anything. Maybe you didn't enjoy it at all. I don't know. If you agree with me, disagree with me, anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on, anything like that, go ahead and let me know. Above that, if you could head into the description box, there's a link in there for Linktree, which takes you to this menu right here. It has links for everything related to the channel. You can purchase some merch, join the Patreon, follow me on Twitter, join the Discord community, a bunch of other things. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, we have a special selection also available to watch today. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to continue on with Beautiful Music Week. Maybe just Beautiful Week? Is it called Beautiful Week? I don't know. I got to double check. I'm just going to say Beautiful Music Week, though, and another special selection. So until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.